how to become this better person at work. One of the things I try to do is to take my quote unquote self out of things. I see this a lot. I'll, hear from somebody who says, that person disrespected me, or don't you think that was disrespectful, as one example. And I mean, I used to feel the same way too. But at one point in my life, I started to really think about, how is this not about me? Even when something's about you, it's not really about you.
Hi, I haven't seen you there. We're trying something slightly different today. As you can see, I have a new microphone and stuff. Today, the episode is with Rachel Nabors. They are one of the most unique people we have in tech, and we need to cherish and celebrate having people like Rachel that are able to not only be great at the technical side, but also everything else, because when it comes to work, not everything is about coding. I hope that the episode today will give you a bit of insights into that, will help you learn a bit more about emotions, learn a bit more about like how much of what we do is shaped by how we feel. And yeah, welcome back to Debug Mind, and let's dive deep. Oh, yeah, and a very quick add-on, because I already forgot to mention it 5 seconds ago. If you're interested in learning more about this, please leave your questions as comments down in the in the box below. We can do a part 2 Q&A type of episode where I'll ask Rachel these questions and they will answer. And I think it would be great. So go down there, do your thing. I'll see you at the end. Hey, Rachel, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to have you here as a guest for Debug Mind. So let's start right off. What do you do in tech? Let's start from there.
That was great to be here, Lorenzo. So I have been in tech for, well, the better part of 2 decades. I think we're now in my 3rd decade, or at least approaching it rapidly. You may know me from such awesome projects as React.dev, and before that, React Native.dev. Made some cool things with the React teams and AWS on the Amplify team. Really passionate about teaching the community how to build their dreams. And I was, before that, very active in standards and the web animation community. Currently, I live in jolly old London, where I'm writing a book on how to survive your tech career.
Which is, first off, awesome, and I'm so looking forward to read the book. But also, it's perfect because I know that you're not writing that book from, this is the code, the algorithms that you need to know to get good in tech, but on the, let's say, everything else. And in particular, I know that there's a lot in your recent content about, emotions and, emotional intelligence. And those are all topics that I think fit perfectly with what I'm trying to do here in the Debug Mind, which is create a bit of awareness about the fact that, even for us in tech, not everything is around the code, right? So I wanted to actually start from there, from the fact that, we are humans at the end of the day, even programmers are humans, and we have emotions. And let's start from there, actually. What are emotions? What definition could we give to emotions?
It's interesting. There were these Victorian era sentiments that only humans could have emotions, that animals didn't, that they functioned somehow on base instinct, reacting to stimulus. It was very behavioralist. But the truth is that we have science that indicates that emotion was a precursor to what we would call reasoning or thought. I think the definition of thought varies a little too much. But you'll find that the emotional centers, the midbrain as it's called, are fairly well developed in most animals on the planet that exist beyond, like fish and worms. And cetaceans themselves, the midbrain is very developed, indicating that these creatures have highly emotional cognitive patterns, which makes sense because they live in groups, etc. But emotions tend to be the precursor to thought. They're a feeling. They don't necessarily respond to reason, but they do help inspire the creature to take certain actions. The emotion of love inspires parents to care for their young. The emotion of fear inspires the prey animal to flee the area when they spot something untoward in the bushes. Emotions underlie a lot of our behavior, and thinking tends to get plastered on as an after effect, almost retconning where that vibe came from. Like, yes, I got startled and ran away because I could see that there was a tiger hiding in the bushes. When surprised, there wasn't a tiger, it was a dog, it was your dog, and you completely, your forebrain just retroactively added the image of a tiger there to explain your behavior. This is a thing that the brain does all the time to trick us into feeling like we're in control, when the truth is our activities usually come from a much deeper, more, I don't want to call it primitive, but a more automated response set.
It's almost as if they were circuits, right, these emotions. And one thing that you said that I think it's also indicative of this is, the thought comes second. At the end of the day, even when we talk about emotions, we don't say, I think I have sadness. We say, I'm sad, right? It's a part of you, of being, in a way, right?
Yeah, more correctly, you might say, I'm experiencing sadness. But that just takes too long to say.
Yeah.
Or I feel sad.
Already. Yeah, exactly. Right. That as you mentioned, it's not something you think; it's something you feel. It's something more embedded in your brain, in the more animal part, and I think that's also a big reason why we need to know how these circuits work, like because they control us in a way, and what we do is an afterthought, right? As you mentioned in the example of the dog. The thinking, the rational process comes at the second step. So knowing and understanding your emotions in a way is a way of better controlling yourself and like regulating, right?
I think regulating is probably a better word than control. There's this stoicism often gets mistaken for the idea that you should have control over your emotions. But in actuality, it's more of you want to be aware of your emotions because they are something that you, as a being composed of many bacteria, different patches to your brain from evolutionary updates, etc. You're like a complex mix of systems that are just barely functioning. And if you're taking them as a whole without really examining where the different feedbacks are coming from or which parts are behaving in certain ways, you live an unexamined life, ignorant of your own nature. And there's nothing wrong with feeling sad. I say this to my partner quite a lot, like you're allowed to feel sad. It's okay to feel sad. You don't have to feel a certain way. But it's important to know, like when you feel sad, it probably colors how you perceive things. Like say somebody sends you an email and says, hey, we need to talk. And it's from this client you were really excited to land. And if you're feeling sad, you're probably going to think, oh no. They don't want to work with me. I'm going to lose the contract. Where actually, if you were happy, you would be like, oh yeah, they're calling to confirm the contract. And in reality, they might just be saying, hey, we had to push the deadline out. I'll get back to you next week. It has nothing to do with either of those things, but you're coloring it. And if you're not aware of what you're feeling, you will mistake those two different frames for reality. You'll get yourself super hyped thinking, oh my God, we're going to close the thing. Or you're going to feel super down. Oh my God, they're rejecting me. Neither of those things are true. They're interpretations through the filter of your emotions. So being aware of them, feeling them, allowing yourself to acknowledge them, puts you in a better place of cohesion to really understand yourself. Not control yourself, but to understand, yeah, I'm feeling a little low today, so I might not be seeing things using my most optimistic lenses. I'm just going to make a note of that. I might change how I feel about them tomorrow, but I'm not going to lock myself into this one worldview based on the circumstances I find myself in today.
One great thing about what you just mentioned is this aspect of recognizing them, right? And I feel that especially as like a white male, grew up in the Western world, emotions have always been something that have not been explained to me, right? And I was wondering if, let's assume, I wonder why I need to assume this, but let's assume that the people watching this might be in a similar position. They don't really know how to recognize their emotions. Like, is there any suggestions that you would give them? Like, okay, this is a good step to get to know your emotions. Is there anything there?
Oh man, that is a really, really good question. So I have at times passed as a man. I've passed as a woman far longer than as a man, so I have a lot more there. People have sometimes been like, well, which would you rather be, a woman or a man? And my answer is neither. Because as a man, you are allowed to experience three emotions. There's only three acceptable emotions, at least in American culture. And it's mad, sad, and I think it's the feeling that you get when you're watching a football show and you're really into it. It's like over excitement or competitiveness. And you're only allowed to have those. I remember being like, wait a minute. When I am acting as a woman in society, I'm able to look at something cute and be like, this is adorable. I love it. If I did that passing as a man, it would look weird. People would be weirded out by that behavior. So from a very young age, children are trained based on which role they're fitting into in society. What is okay to express and what isn't. Women, for instance, aren't allowed to be pissed off. I express that I'm pissed off a lot, and that can disconcert people. I identify as non-binary, but like I said, I was a woman for the better part of my life, and you get feedback like abrasive, whereas those same emotions expressed that way from a man are considered assertive, or good things. This starts when we're children, and it just continues. So the best way to get in touch with your emotions, I think, one of the things you can do, like a couple of things I know have really worked out for my male friends, are like joining a men's help circle. These exist. It's where men come. It's a safe space to talk with each other and express their emotions. Yep, you can go see a therapist. It's often stigmatized, but that's a great place to start. But also, like, men's help circles. Some of my friends who have religious communities, they seek this sort of emotional validation from their communities there. Any place where people are sitting down and having a moment to express how they feel when they're not going to be attacked by it. And beyond that, if you're not ready to take those steps, increasing your emotional literacy is a great place to start. And believe it or not, kids shows are a great place for this. Bluey is a great example of a kids show that can help adults reparent themselves, as I've heard this called. Kids are being raised differently from how they were raised when we were youngsters. And so they're being given a little bit more emotional vocabulary in their materials. I personally like to say the first 2 seasons of My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic is the best place for anyone to get started. There's a reason why this appealed to boys and girls and adults around the world and was such a phenomenon, because it did such a good job of introducing people to the basics of interpersonal relationships and feelings in such a fun and healthy way.
That's a great answer, and I totally agree. Like, I've only heard great things about both Bluey and My Little Pony. I know that usually people that are into that show are very passionate about it, and I can see why. I need to give them a go myself. A couple more that comes to mind. Well, I guess Inside Out is probably like the most main media piece of content, I guess, that exists to describe emotions potentially. You have the 5, I guess, are those like the 5 main emotions? Like sadness, joy, rage, fear, and disgust?
I do think that sounds like the core, and different blends of them create different nuances in human emotion.
I think at the end of the day, the whole movie, spoilers for that, like at the end, it's literally what you just mentioned, the fact that you can merge 2 of those to create something new. I think, what was it, like joy and sadness had to create a new composite emotion. I don't remember too much about the movie, but I remember that aspect. And yeah, probably starting from something as approachable as My Little Pony, Inside Out, or some of these other shows. Like, please don't get scared by the fact, or like get held back by the fact they're TV shows for kids. They're probably very good for a reason, right?
They're written by great people. Like My Little Pony had people on the team who had worked on classics like Eek the Cat and Animaniacs. Like it was an all-star lineup. So, you know, there's no shame in taking part in something that is created by greats. I also got to say, like, another thing that can be helpful is journaling. There's also mindfulness as a practice. Like, one of the things you got to do is catch yourself when the emotions are rising in you. Because often our minds are tricky. Like, you'll be feeling something and your mind, you know, will just assign thoughts to it. Like, you're feeling bad, and so your mind starts talking about, you know, negative things, like stories that you've been telling yourself, like, yeah, you know, my dad is never pleased with me. I'm not good enough for him. Even though your dad's nowhere near anything relevant to what you're going through that day. But you start bringing it up, and you need to catch yourself while you're having those thoughts. Like, oh, wait a minute. I'm having feelings. And now my mind is like ad-libbing on top of them and assigning motives and causes, because that's what brains are good at. You know, that's what they're for, and they get bored. And so when you have emotions, they go to town. And the trick is to catch yourself as the emotions are surfacing, and then being able to label them and kind of figure out, like, well, where did that come from? And mindfulness can help you practice, like, it's noticing when thoughts are coming into your mind, when feelings are arising, not doing anything about them. You're just noticing them. It's practicing noticing, the art of noticing. That's really magical. And if you're struggling with, like, assigning emotions, you can get, like, an emotion wheel that lines up all those different vibes on those 5 axes, and you can, like, point at the one you're feeling and maybe write it down in a journal at the end of each day. Like, that's another way that you can just catch yourself and be like, that's what this flavor is. Almost like you're doing a wine tasting course, but with your emotions.
I don't know why I completely forgot about this, but yes, emotion wheels. Those visual tools are so good for me. Like, I have a couple saved, like, in a folder, literally because of this. Because sometimes I need something to tell me or help me figure out what I'm feeling, and I find that also the fact that they have colors assigned. You also used the word color earlier when talking about an example of how your brain, through the lens of different emotions, paints or, like, fills the gaps in a situation based on that. And I really think there is something viscerally visual about emotions. Like, you can tell that red is rage, kind of. So yes, 100% +1 on the emotion wheels. And trying to maybe take all the things we said so far and going back and expanding a bit on the examples you were giving earlier, like, how do emotion play a role in how we work, in our everyday life when we work? Because they do have an impact, that we like it or not, right?
Yeah, they have a huge impact. And I've run into people who are like, yeah, well, you can't take things personally, and your emotions, you gotta, like, leave them out. You're really emotional at work. Like, I've heard all of these things thrown around about me, about other people. I have even said this about some people, I'm sure. But there's this idea that we can somehow separate man can separate themselves from their emotions. And that's not true. Because when we work, we are not automatons. We are not machines. We are squishy, complicated mashups of all the parts that make us. And then we have to work with other squishy mashups. And the problem is that people who are unaware of the things that are broiling inside of them are doomed to misunderstand those around them and themselves. You can't be a 10x engineer when you alienate and isolate yourself from everyone around you. In fact, I often say there's many ways to be a 10x engineer, and one of them is that you help the engineers around you become better. It's easy to be a 10x engineer if you're giving 5 other engineers a 2x buff, for instance. Mm-hmm. And if you understand where you and they are coming from, it's a lot easier to resolve conflicts. It's a lot easier to push forward when things are difficult or circumstances are difficult. It's a lot easier to get people to rally behind a good idea. Like, it just makes working smoother and less frustrating. And even understanding, I think we talked about this before, like in this industry, who is not on some sort of a spectrum? Who is not, struggling with attention deficit disorder or somewhere on the autism spectrum, or, even struggling with CPTSD? We often end up with the same constellation of symptoms that drive us to enjoying solving puzzles quietly on a computer screen. And even understanding where your coworker comes from. Like, my coworker doesn't like to spend a lot of time around people. It makes them feel anxious. So when we're having code reviews, I can understand why they wouldn't want to have their code picked apart in front of a crowd of 20 people, and that would make them feel hostile. I can see them getting hostile right now and feeling like they're being attacked. Maybe I should step in and say, hey, this is all really good feedback. How about you write it down in a document for Robert to review at another time? And we can have this conversation after he's thought about it for a bit. There's all kinds of ways that you can intervene and prevent situations from overflowing, and even just remove and protect yourself. Like, say you are Robert and you can feel yourself getting upset in the situation and you know you're not going to be able to hear any of this feedback. Then you can advocate for yourself and say, hey, this is all amazing feedback. I would like to be able to look it over at my leisure. Could I ask you all to write it down and send it to me, and I can get back to you in like 2 hours or something? We can cover it the next meeting. So it's important to be aware of how you're feeling in professional settings, and also to understand others, because otherwise you're going to be one of those people who's like, well, that person's just a jerk, or, screw them, I know what's right, or, this place is toxic, everyone's, doesn't get me. These are all the symptoms of the emotionally unaware, people who haven't quite figured themselves out and haven't figured out other people. And if you can get past that dip, you're just going to be a far more functional, happy, productive human being, and the people around you are going to feel the same way. Hopefully, ideally.
Yeah. Hopefully, at least the people that are around you that are not strictly engineers will be more responsive to you. And maybe you can be the change that you want in the world, right? Maybe the other people will see you act differently, be more caring, be more human in a way, and they will say, hey, how is it possible that you're not as sad as I am or as angry as I am with everyone else? And maybe they will take their own first steps. One thing was coming to mind about, you've been describing quite a few situations, and I'm sure that people that are listening are like nodding along, like, yeah, I'm that person, or I'm that person. Let's say I am that person. I'm the person that gets very angry with everyone else because I feel like I'm not seen, I'm not understood, I feel that I'm overworked. Like, what would be a good, like, so we said, okay, step 0 is understanding that you have emotions and recognizing them. But like, what is the next step that you should take? What should you do to try and become this better version of yourself? In your opinion, of course.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's see. How to become this better person at work. One of the things I try to do is to take my quote unquote self out of things. I see this a lot. I'll, hear from somebody who says, that person disrespected me, or don't you think that was disrespectful? As one example. And I mean, I used to feel the same way too. But at one point in my life, I started to really think about, how is this not about me? Even when something's about you, it's not really about you. You bring 50% of any situation you're in, you're responsible for 50% of it. This is a saying from couples therapy, which is, in a relationship, you're responsible for 50% of it, and the other person is responsible for the other 50% of it. You can't own more than your 50%. Say you're a part of a toxic coding community, and, nobody who looks like you wants to be a part of it. Now, You could say, oh, it's all my responsibility to bring more people like me into this community. But then you're owning 100% of the problem. Meanwhile, the other people you work with in this community are not owning any of it. What is it that they are not doing that's turning off people like you? So only own your 50%. So this is something that I try to do is whenever I'm in a situation and things are getting difficult, even like if the thing is someone else, like say you're working with a colleague who's grieving, a lot of people will immediately be like, oh my God, I'd feel so sorry. Like, that would suck. And they immediately imagine how it would feel for them. And then they try to treat that person the way they feel, like what would make them comfortable. But they never stop to slow down and wonder, wait a minute, how is this not about me? What relationship might this person have? What feelings might this person have that I can't fathom? What if this person had a conflicted relationship with their family, and they might have a completely different gamut? So rather than assuming everyone's like you, the best thing you can do is get curious about their 50%. Decenter things from yourself. Cast the spotlight back on other people. This also goes into being a great developer advocate. Great developer advocates don't, I guess great developer influencers have huge cults of personality and cultivate their thoughts and their way of life and their opinions. But great developer advocates are always pointing the spotlight back at the community. What's the community excited about? How's the community feeling about this? How can I help the community? And not talking about how, that core team didn't listen to them and, that's a big affront to their ego. Once again, that's bringing the spotlight back on yourself. And the best way to navigate these situations is to get curious about the other person and to only own what you're responsible for in the relationship. If you messed up on a project, you can own the mess up. You can own that you didn't ship on time. But you're not responsible for the budget that didn't come through. That meant that you didn't have enough manpower to ship on time. You don't have to blame the budget. You don't have to say that. That's the 50% that the people who own that budget have to own. You can just say, you're right, it was really hard to ship this on time. We didn't have the resources for it. And then you can work backwards from that. If you work with smart people, they'll find a way to make sure you have the resources next time. If you work with stupid people, you'll quickly know. I'm sorry, that was a judgment call. That was me judging folks. I hope this is making sense. I'm rambling on a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I actually wanted to maybe zoom in a bit more. Like, how does this approach this, like, okay, I'm only owning my 50% would work in, let's say, a direct conflict or like a direct discussion with another person? Like, what I've seen in my experience is that when there is friction between engineers, those situations are usually very hard to untangle because neither sides have good ways of dealing with the situation. So the most used strategy that I've seen happen is that one of the two parts basically goes into avoidance mode. So what is an healthier way of living through those situations?
Well, avoidance mode is scary. I do it too. And the problem is, there's another tool called rupture and repair. The idea is that, remember, relationships they're like the edge between two nodes, right? And you're responsible for your 50% of that transaction and, the other person is theirs. Now, what happens when the two nodes are at conflict, right? The relationship sours and it can rupture, like there's a break, right? And if you were raised in a family that has healthy conflict resolution habits and you're perfectly neurotypical, like this is no problem. You get together and you shake hands on it, and you work your way through and you agree to disagree, blah, blah, blah.
Do these people actually exist?
I don't know. I think they go to Harvard, but
okay.
I have not met many of them. But say you don't know how to repair a rupture. You've never seen it happen before. Maybe you never saw your parents fighting. Maybe you just had parents where when there was a rupture, you just saw that they didn't know how to repair it. Often this is something we learn from our parents. So if your parents, for instance, would have fights that were only resolved by time passing and apologies were never given, you don't know how to repair a rupture. Many managers don't know how to repair a rupture. So when they see reports fighting, they just kind of back away. And that's terrible because it becomes this gross, pussy relationship that's just festering. And what they need is somebody to come in and help them resolve the conflicts, which can be tough. You know, it's not pleasant. It's definitely emotional labor, but you're delivering something as a team. You can't deliver when you're in a ruptured state. You have to do it if you're going to continue to deliver. Think of it as something you have to do for the team, for the product, for the project, for the ultimate vision. It's not about you. It's about something greater than you, and you have to resolve it. And sometimes that does mean one of you is going to have to be the bigger person and own a little bit more than your half, and go and practice some conflict resolution with the other person, some uncomfortable conversations, and learn how to repair the rupture. And usually it starts by helping the other person feel heard. And that means a lot of listening. And there's this, oftentimes when you're in this ruptured situation, you really want to feel heard too. You really want to say, but you don't understand. You don't get it. But they also feel that way, and they can't hear you until they feel heard. So you have to momentarily put your needs aside and do that little extra heavy lifting, which usually women do. So when you're in a mostly male-dominated field, you get a lot of problems because they don't know how to do this heavy lifting. It's pretty heavy, but you just put it aside and you go, okay, so, you know, like, how is that making you feel? What are you afraid is going to happen? What's the worst that can happen? And just talk them through it and listen and then repeat. Yeah, it sounds like you really, you're worried that if we don't go your route, we won't launch on time. Yeah. And they'll be like, yes, exactly. And I'll be like, well, why do you think I feel the way I do? And then they have to use their words. Once they feel like they're heard, then they'll start to use their words. You want to get them to use their words, to start repeating and mirroring you. And if they say something that's not true, rather than saying, no, that's wrong, it's a good idea to come in and be like, oh, really? Why do you think I'd feel that? Or, I hadn't considered that. Where is that coming from? And get curious about where they're formatting that information, what's informing that. They could be seeing a ghost from the past and projecting it onto you. That happens. It could be that they see something you don't, and you need to consider it. And you've got to be in that calm, information-taking in place to get there. But this is the heavy-duty labor of repairing that rupture. When a rupture happens, you have to repair it. If you put it off, it will only lead to problems. You will end up in a situation where you're working with someone you don't talk with, or one of you will get fired or laid off or moved to a different team. But there's no good outcome.
I'm actually so glad that this conversation, we're recording it, because what you just said, it's so powerful. And like I'm gonna like cut that part just for me, and I have that coaching bit of like you explaining how to deal with the situation, like saved somewhere, and like keep it very close, because I find that it's so, you've done a great job right now explaining that. And I want a lot of people to hear that, especially if they're managers, if they are dealing with high pressure situation, where I feel that these situations are happening more frequently than probably other places. And sorry, it literally gave me chills. I was like, this is incredibly powerful. So sorry, I just wanted to acknowledge that, because it's so, oh my God. Oh my God, so many people come to mind that really need to hear this. And trying to get back into topic though, very quickly, just kind of like a corollary to what you just described. How would this change if you're like in a situation where like it's not a balanced conflict, like you're not arguing with a colleague directly, but maybe you're arguing with like your director of engineering. Like when there is a clear power imbalance, and you're like, let's say the small person, like how does that change? What could be a good strategy?
Well, there's a great book called Managing Up that I highly recommend for anyone who feels that they are dealing with somebody who may not be as equipped as they are, or maybe just isn't equipped to do the things. Only 20% of people in leadership roles are really good at their roles. Most of them have been promoted out of necessity, not out of merit. Unfortunately, we don't live in a meritocracy. We'd live in a very different world if we did. Even tech is not a meritocracy. There's nepotism, popularity contests, and all those good things. And sometimes just showing your work isn't going to be enough. And even sometimes people who do great work aren't necessarily great at things like repair. It would be great, but sometimes you get a manager who is an amazing individual contributor or is an amazing strategist, but is not going to, for instance, help you resolve a conflict with a colleague who's crucial to moving a project forward because your manager is intimidated by it or doesn't have the skills and is hoping that ignoring the problem will go away. You can't necessarily go to your manager and say, yo, I need you to behave in a different way. You're inconveniencing me. That's unlikely to work. You're probably not in a safe space to have confrontations with leadership. Some people are. I think if you have a certain level of clout and if you have the ability to walk away if things go badly, you are in a position to call people on things. There are situations where I am in that position. But there are many situations where I'm not, and where I can look and be like, wow, did the director really say that? That was uncalled for. I don't like the way this person is badgering me in this conversation, but I can't stand up for myself because it will look like I am, this is a public spot. It will look like I am fighting with leadership and insubordinate. And that will only lose other people's confidence in me in this meeting. Oh gosh, how do I resolve this? It really depends on what kind of bigger dog you're working with here. If you're working with somebody who wants to learn and grow and you have a fairly communicative relationship, it is possible you can both cool down, revisit, and have that heart-to-heart, like, hey, things got pretty heated back there. I just wanted to check in. Your actions X. It's always about the actions. You never assign intent. You always make it objective, Be objective as much as possible. Don't assign intent. Don't assign value. Just look at what happened. When you did this thing, I felt kind of like, or it made, I felt this, input, output. And, just start the conversation slowly from there. In this case, they are responsible for a lot more of the repair because they do have the power. And you can only do so much managing up before you have to navigate around people. Sometimes people are dangerous, especially if you're working with types that may have some of the dark triad qualities, narcissism. A lot of people who end up in places of power tend to have traits that make them unsafe to handle in this way. And it's better to work on moving around them and even engaging some of those avoidant strategies. But for the most part, if you're working with someone like a manager or maybe someone else's manager, then, you can try to have this conversation and things can go better. If they're not open to having that conversation, you may not get the resolution you're looking for, and you may have to work you may have to work more on externalizing the sort of interactions that they are bringing to your table. This is where depersonalizing comes in. If they have bad feedback on your code and they're throwing a fit, you're going to have to accept this is not about me. This is that, once again, how is it not about you? It's not your product was shit and you are a bad person and a failure and shouldn't have a job. It's this person doesn't like the work that I've done, and they are choosing to express it in this way. And I do not agree with the way that they are expressing it, but I'm not in a place to change their behavior. And you can then decide whether you want to continue tolerating that behavior. Maybe you have to, you need the money. or not. Maybe another job comes along and you're like, I don't need to. I'm going to move on. And you can decide. And the part of the relationship that you own is whether you confront them and you try to attempt a repair or open that conversation, or whether you continue to sidestep and navigate around them and keep their feedback and their behavior always at arm's length and don't internalize it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there that you mentioned in terms of strategies. You mentioned, leaving the room, coming back at a later time, potentially having the conversation. You mentioned depersonalizing, which sounds like a very important thing to do when it comes to separating your self-worth from your work.
Yep. Hard to do if you're a passionate person, but a very valuable skill.
Yeah. And I want to get back to that, to zooming in on what we just talked about, which is this aspect of separating yourself from your work. I know that you have a maybe potentially controversial take when it comes to work-life balance. do you want to explain? I think you are in the camp of work-life balance doesn't exist.
Yep.
Right? Okay, I mean, can you explain this a bit? I'm so curious.
Well, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They weren't like, I hunt and gather 40 hours a week, and then the rest of the time I play with my children, and I like to think of myself as a swamp person. No. The thing that they do is also the thing that sustains them. The archer considers themselves good at their craft, and people who excel tend to be people who take pride in the niche that, supports and sustains them. That said, I have seen work-life balance corrupted by companies to get carte blanche to do whatever they want with you for 40 hours a week, treat you however they want, have you have to clock in for a bathroom break, that sort of thing. This is not usually something we experience in tech, but it kind of is. This is the whole idea of you will be on for 40 hours a week, and with the little bit of time you have left on the weekends, then you can be your quote-unquote real self. You can shove your admin in there and somehow still be a whole person. I don't think it really holds up in reality. I think that if your work is sustaining to you, if you're passionate about it, you live it all the time. You think about it in the shower. And the challenge then is to make sure that it doesn't become all of you, that you don't overgrow with it to the neglect of your family and your health. I, for instance, have to make sure that I have doctor's appointments scheduled. When my dentist is over, they're like, okay, well, we'll see you in 6 months. I'm like, no, we're putting it on the calendar now. They're like, why? I'm like, because I won't remember. And then I won't do it, and I will just be my job, and I won't take care of myself. I need to make sure that I'm carving out the time for me so that I'm taking care of me and I'm not just becoming my job. The machine wants you to become wholly your job. But our ancestors who were hunter-gatherers, they were also songsters. They also made food around the campfire, and they laughed and they shouted. They weren't always providing and hunting. They had recreation, they had love, they had life. And you have to make sure that you are carving time into your schedule, sometimes in those 40-hour areas that the company would like you to keep for them. You have to make sure that you're injecting the things that you need into your life too. So I'm more of a person who, rather than thinking about balance, I think about boundaries, setting boundaries. And this also is part of the reason why I talk about putting a little space between your value and your craft. Like, you're a person first, you're an excellent bow crafter second. First there's you, and you are very good at some things. But whether your bow breaks or not is not a condemnation of you or your skills. It just means that part of you is a journey you're still on. It's a little difficult to explain, but I think that work-life balance gets better when we stop identifying so much with our work and we start setting more boundaries, accepting our whole selves rather than trying to carve it up into little land plots that we can sell off. Because the company will always take more and more of what you'll give it. We had a saying at AWS, which is AWS will never ask you to spend less time at the office. And that's it. You have to ask yourself to spend less time. The hunter has to eventually stop making arrowheads and, prepare the deer skin and make the clothing and play with their children. You just can't do it all the time. You're a whole person.
So maybe trying to say back to you to see if I understood. Basically, the main problem with calling it like work-life balance is that you're clearly separating the time when you're working from the time that you have for your life. And instead of being like black squares on your calendar and white squares on your calendar, everything should be more mixed in a way, more gray. You should be able to more control the fact that you're one person dealing with both things all the time.
It's nuanced.
Okay.
I think you shouldn't feel bad if you're thinking about work on the weekend.
Okay.
But your job shouldn't make you feel bad if you need to take time off to look after yourself during the week. It requires more flexibility. Anytime we're carving up our week into timelines when we're available, timelines when we're not, the job's always going to push those boundaries. It's always going to push on them. It's always going to ask for a little bit more, a little bit more. It even has unmarked access to you on the weekends because it's living in your head. And by pretending that we can be one person for certain times of the day and then just flip that off and not be a person, it's not only dehumanizing, but it also doesn't acknowledge reality. It doesn't acknowledge the whole person, which plays right into the hands of, the system that really would love it if we could just work 24/7 on promoting the system's goals. It would love it. It's not a person. It's not evil. It's just we get rewarded for giving more of ourselves than is necessary. To go back to the hunter, imagine if a hunter-gatherer tried to only hunt during these hours during the week. And then the rest of the week, they could do all the other things. But in their world, they would hunt when the game was ready to be hunted, which varies throughout the year. And they would do other things when they weren't hunting. They would do other things. They were always that same person. They were always the hunter, but they were also the clothes maker, the parent, etc. And they allowed different things to take priority. They would not go hunting, for instance, while their child was bleeding. But we have companies that somehow expect us to work when our child lies bleeding. That doesn't make sense. That's not human. That's humans being treated as machines that you can switch on and off. There are boundaries. You have to be able to look down at your child and say, no, I will not hunt today because this is more important. And the company needs to back off and let you do that. So you need to have that kind of a relationship to let the important things take their place in your life, whether or not that agrees with a number of boxes on your calendar.
Yeah, I think that mixed this broader vision with what we were saying earlier about emotions, about like being able to handle the situations that comes your way. I think these all kind of like compounds into what I would say is probably a healthier approach to work as we intend to work today. So thank you for describing all these things. I think you've done a great job at giving these details. If there was, let's say, of all the things we talked about today, like one key learning, like people have listened through the whole thing, we're now getting to the end, like what's the one thing that you really want people to take away and apply to their daily life?
Own your 50%. When you're in a relationship, whether it's with your job, your friend, your coworker, always own your 50%. Label it, understand it, seek to understand your motivations, and try to be curious, not just about other people's motivations and their internal states, but also about your own.
I mean, that's such a perfect line to end it. Like, oh, you said it so well. Thank you so much for coming. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to have you here. And I think that the things you're focusing on right now, the type of content that you're making, which is about this area, is very important for today's world. And I really hope that people will get at least inspired to take more ownership around these areas of life. And of course, if they have any other questions, I'm sure we're going to put like all your socials down in the description so they can reach out. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. It's been a real pleasure.
Hi, you're back. Nice to see you here at the end. We're going to keep it short and sweet. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Find everything about Rachel in the description below. There's going to be links. There's going to be socials, all the things, the newsletter, and the rest of the content that they have produced so far. There are going to be some other links as well if you're interested in learning more about this area of working in general and how it affects us. And yeah, aside from that, as always, please subscribe, like, and there are a couple more videos on screen at this point, so enjoy those. Take care of yourself.